The Lower North Shore is a really unique place. I mean, I'm sure everybody says that about where they live, but the Lower North Shore is a unique place in that you have vast richness of history and culture, as I said, over thousands of years, the different peoples that have inhabited here, made a living, a home. So we have things that are very unique to this region that I think are of interest to people coming from a city setting or from just far away. The local people are very happy to share their history, their stories, probably their jam with you. You know, you come and people are happy to see you.
Well, the Inuit came down the Labrador coast around 1300, and they got to Strait of Belle Isle somewhere around 1600. They landed and set up various villages along the coast, about 5 or 6 villages that we found archaeologically as ruins from their winter houses. During that time, the Basques, were here, probably starting around maybe as early as 1520, something like that. But they were here in large numbers by 1550, 1580. The Inuit stayed here only for 100 years, but then they had to retreat to central Labrador because they were not welcome here. And from the archaeological standpoint, we're just trying to see what are the remains of these groups so we can actually identify their sites, find out what their toolkits were like, seeing if we could how they related to each other while they were here. The Inuit were already consummate whale hunters for the last 1,000 years. The Basques had been just starting and they weren't using the sophisticated technology the Inuit had developed. It's just part of a long story of the Inuit occupation of the Lower North Shore. Resulted in the local people here learning about dog sleds, learning about harpoons, learning about how to get along in the winter, and all these different things, and for the Basques, they got a whole different perspective on whaling. And of course, then what happened is both disappeared. The Basques, shifted north after the whales were run out of here, were hunted out, and they had a very big career in Greenland and so forth, but they never returned here. They never left population behind like the French or English did. Both kind of created this wonderful contact between, Europeans and Inuit people for a few hundred years, and then both just disappeared, and history went on.
Hi, my name's Eileen Schofield. I'm sitting in the Whiteley Museum in Bonne-Espérance, St. Paul's River, Quebec, the Lower North Shore. I'm part of the board of directors, volunteers that take care of this beautiful establishment. The Whiteley Museum was started by a group of interested, committed citizens here. I think it was in the late 80s, 90s, where there was a failure of fishery, and they really wanted to capture and preserve the history of the Whiteley. He originally was from England, but he and his mother had lived down in Boston, and they came as fishermen and on a part of a group, and then he decided to start his own industry, and he was credited with inventing the cod trap. So people used to come to St. Paul's River, Bonne-Espérance, to fish, and then they themselves would go back to St. John's, Newfoundland. They lived there. People would come with them to work and then go back at the same time. So they continued in that manner for a while. Then eventually they started to live year-round. And people from here are the descendants of all of those people that came. So you're looking at English, Irish, Scottish, French, Americans, like people from all over the world that eventually lived here. We looked at the Whiteley as a very important part of the history here, but there was also the Basque, and we started looking at all the different cultures that have lived in this area, and we wanted to try to capture that and share that knowledge with people, tourists, local people, everybody. There's been huge changes over the last 100 years in this area of the world, and some things still remain the same, as you said. So 100 years ago, basically people lived off the land, they hunted, they fished, 99% of their food came from the land. It was a good life in many ways, very hard life. People worked very hard for their livelihood to survive. I mean, it was survival. If they didn't fish, well, then the family didn't have much to eat, or if they didn't get caribou or rabbits or partridges or hunting in the wintertime, again, people could go hungry. It was more of a community spirit, of course, in those days. families probably wouldn't go hungry because somebody else would help them out. There was that aspect of very much taking care of their neighbors. The people were and are very resilient. Again, like we said, life was hard.
I have a big connection to this island because my grandmother came from Newfoundland with Bossy Whiteley as a servant girl when she was 13 years old. And this is where she had my mother, and this is where the Thomases came from. The only means of transport would have been dog team, and this, this all freezes over in the winter. We still come out here, and probably in December this would have been frozen. So he wouldn't have any more, he would have had to walk in or go in by dog team into the village. So they were marooned on this island when winter started set in late November, early December.
This is the Easter Bunny coming, huh?
See this?
Oh my God.
Codfish.
Codfish,
Wow,
fresh codfish. I'll give you a tip on how to fillet a codfish. And yesterday when we come in, they caught some mackerel after we come in. Not very good fishermen. Now I couldn't. Now, this last generation, my generation in particular, it's been huge change. We were the first ones that were really taken out of these isolated communities and given some high school education, and for others, university, post-secondary education. So it's been really transformative. Since the 1960s era, on the Bass Coast Nord and the Lower North Shore, it's been really transformative in every sense of the word. It's like I always say, we went from dog teams to seeing man land on the moon. You guys are eating it. This is where we make for the frying pan. Mm-hmm. Me, when I left this little community, there was no road, there was no hydro, there was, school was still basically elementary, and the fishing was still the cod trap, and, it was pretty well basic elementary things going on. And then in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it just transformed itself so much that the coast today is still reeling from the effects of what those changes were. So is that good enough demonstration? You got to see the cod being cleaned?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was awesome.
Of course, there's so many exciting stories in Bonne Espérance and the Lower North Shore, but to really validate some of the past history, you have to work with the archaeologists. And we were super fortunate to get in touch with Dr. Bill Fitzhugh, who's the director of the Arctic Studies of the Smithsonian Institute.
Bonne Espérance Island, we discovered, has two Basque sites, at least two on them. It's a special place because it's very close to the outer coast, to the Gulf, so it's got easy access to the whaling that the Basques were there for. Last year, this is 2022, and we found a stone wall running alongside the shore, and then we found some materials on the site that looked like there might be some workplace or domestic activities. So we've come back this summer to do some further investigation to open up the site. A little Basque whaling site like this has never been excavated, this type of site on the coast. It's kind of a real crossroads sort of area, crossroads of cultures here. And I think the archaeology can give people a better understanding of not only the specific history of, when their people were here, but also a history of their technology, like the harpoons and their sleds, and those things, have migrated into new technologies like snowmobiles and, outboard engines and everything. But the animals are still the same, and they have the same pattern, seasonal, ups and downs over the years and so forth. So, I think understanding the history of a place like this gives people who are local people a lot of appreciation for their ancestors.
When we get these types of discoveries validated and dated, carbon dated, and the whole 9 yards, it's something that we can show in the museum to really document our history, which is making this history richer. So it's bringing people in, they get to see the whole story. It's just a fascinating story to see of all the different peoples that have lived here over 10,000 of years. So.
We are at the Whiteley fishery. Was built in 1869 from William Whiteley. It was a gift for his newly wife, Louisa Thompson. He said that he will build the prettiest house in the region, so she was from England, so she came here to live with him. Kind of a romantic place. It was torn down, dismantled, destroyed in the 70s when the fishery was all gone and nobody came here. And they destroyed, they didn't think about the heritage or nothing.
Yeah.
It was something that came afterwards. So now the museum is trying to revitalize this place, to gather stories and to keep it, to safeguard.
I think to look to the future, you also look at the past. There's always change here, so it's nice for people to be able to come and visit and learn about this area. Besides the history and the culture, but also the land is beautiful, the water. The people here often are like jacks of many trades. They're not only just a fisherman or a mechanic or a teacher. They often have many skills, and I think that's what's made people very independent and self-reliant here, and I think that's going to continue. Those are character traits that you don't change. Okay, things might get tough for a while, but I think there will always be people living on the Lower North Shore. That's my feeling.